My son stopped answering my calls after Ruth told the town I was unstable. I didn't fight her with gossip, I fought her. What happened next turned a dying piece of land into a battle for legacy and for love. I'm Cassie Caldwell, 38 years old, and until last year, I used to help plan the annual Caldwell Harvest bonfire like it was a sacred rite. My hands built those hay bale pyramids. My voice led the kids' autumn songs. My sweat soaked into the soil of that farm long before Ruth started calling it hers. But this year, I wasn't invited. The official word was that the guest list was tight. The real truth was delivered by Ruth herself. Lips curled in that sugar-sweet snarl she saves just for me. We've all agreed, Cassie. You're not welcome this year. And just like that, a tradition I'd helped nourish was ripped from me like a weed she couldn't wait to burn. The first time Ruth called me help, it was in front of the ladies from her garden club. I was elbow deep in compost, Aiden strapped to my chest in a sling, and Daniel was off somewhere pretending our marriage hadn't already begun to crack. She smiled that brittle smile of hers, the one that curled just enough to look polite. "This is Cassie," she said. "Daniel's wife. She's helping out on the farm." I remember blinking through sweat, a trowel still in my hand. Helping out. As if I hadn't been managing their books, feeding their goats, planting their herbs for the last 3 years. As if I was a guest. That was always Ruth's game, redefining reality in subtle, sharpened ways. Not lies, not exactly. Just enough distortion to make people question what they knew. I married Daniel when I was 22, bright-eyed and eager, grateful to be brought into something rooted and steady. The Caldwells had history. Land. A way of life that felt bigger than the wandering chaos of my childhood. Richard, Daniel's father, welcomed me with a nod and a list of chores. Ruth? She welcomed me with cool smiles and tightly controlled kindness. She handed me motherhood like it was an audition. When Aiden was born, I hoped things would soften, that she'd see the way I mothered, the way I worked this land like it was a second skin. But instead, she doubled down. My meals were unusual, my methods modern, my presence confusing. She never called me unstable, not then. She just made sure everyone else wondered if I was. When the marriage fell apart, it wasn't a dramatic collapse, just erosion. Daniel, always conflict avoidant, slipped into silence. Ruth stepped into the void. "You can stay on the land," she told me once, voice like silk soaked in vinegar. "But don't expect to keep the boy." I laughed. I thought she was bluffing. She wasn't. Custody became a war I didn't want but had to fight. And when I lost, when the judge handed Aiden over to the more stable environment, Ruth didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The victory was baked into the way she served pie at the next bonfire, like nothing had happened. She took everything. The narrative, the farm, my son. But she didn't take the roots. Richard saw to that. And now? Now the land is shifting back. The truth, once buried, is rising, like seeds cracking open in the dark. I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of her. I nodded like it didn't matter, and turned away before she could see my hands shake. But it did matter. More than I wanted to admit. Because my son Aiden, my baby who used to wrap his fingers around mine while watching fireflies beside that very bonfire, was now 16 and old enough to choose. And he chose them. Ruth. The farm. Silence. He hadn't answered my last 4 texts. I told myself he was just busy: school, chores, harvest prep, but I knew the truth. Ruth had gotten in his ear. She was always good at that. Subtle digs, carefully phrased concern. "Your mother's just overwhelmed. She's trying, bless her heart. But don't you think it's better here, where it's stable?" That kind of poison doesn't feel like poison until it's too late. So when I pulled up that dusty gravel road, basket of homemade cinnamon rolls still warm on the passenger seat, I didn't expect a welcome, but I needed to try. Just in case. Just for him. The sound of laughter hit me before I turned the bend. The smell of burning oak and spiced cider drifted through the trees. They were already starting. I parked by the fence, just far enough that no one would see the rust on my old Ford and whisper more judgments. I stepped out, adjusted my sweater, and told myself I had every right to be there. Then I saw them. Ruth, in her cream shawl, holding court like the queen of harvest. Daniel beside her, smiling like he hadn't once promised forever to me under these same trees. And Aiden. My son. Laughing with the others, a caramel apple in his hand, that floppy curl falling over his eyes just like his dad's used to. I waved, stupid, hopeful wave. He saw me. Paused. His smile faltered. and then he turned away. Ruth saw it too. Her eyes followed his and landed on me. Her smile didn't fade, it sharpened. She walked over slowly, every click of her boots deliberate. "Cassie," she said, voice syrupy in public. "Didn't you get the message? This isn't your place anymore." I looked past her, toward the fire, the kids, the life I used to have, and then I looked her dead in the eye. "I'm not here for you." "Oh, honey," she said, not even flinching, "no one here is." I should have left. But instead, I turned back toward the truck, placed the basket gently on the fence post, and walked away without a word. Let her see my back. Let her wonder what I would do next. Because this story wasn't over. And neither was I. When I was 22 and stupid in love, I moved on to Caldwell Farm with nothing but a duffel bag full of threadbare clothes and a heart so full of hope it made me dizzy. Richard met me at the gate that first day. Tall, sun-worn, with hands like split wood and eyes that saw straight through the pretense. "You love him?" he asked, no introduction, no smile. I nodded, clutching Daniel's hand like it was the only steady thing in the world. "Then I guess we'll see," Richard said, turning back toward the barn. And we did see. For 16 years, we saw everything. Droughts. Calves born sideways. Bank notices with their clean white envelopes and their dirty implications. And Richard? He didn't talk much, but when he did, it meant something. Over time, I learned to understand his silences too. The ones filled with quiet approval when I stitched up a goat in the middle of the night. The ones that lingered after I caught Ruth lying about the books. He never said it, but I knew. He saw me. I stayed when Daniel started coming home late. I stayed when Aiden was born and I had to learn how to nurse and weed the herb rows with a baby strapped to my chest. I stayed when Ruth cornered me in the pantry with that brittle smile and told me I'd never really be a Caldwell. "He married you?" she said. "That doesn't mean you belong." But it was Richard who asked me to stay the longest. When the cancer came, when it spread like mold under the floorboards, it was me he called for. Not Ruth, not Daniel. Me. I fed him broth when he couldn't chew. I changed his sheets when the nurses stopped coming. I read aloud from his journals when the nights got too long and the morphine made the walls blur. And he cried, once. Just once. Told me he was scared the land would be twisted into something it wasn't. Told me I had a good heart. A real heart. "This place needs someone who still sees the roots," he said. "Not just the harvest. But dying wishes mean nothing when you're not the one holding the title deed." When he passed, Ruth made quick work of the narrative. He was confused near the end, she told anyone who asked why Cassie wasn't mentioned in the funeral arrangements. "We're all grieving, but the family needs space now." I guess I'd never really been part of that, not in her mind. Then came the custody war. Aiden, 12 and angry. Daniel, meek as always, letting Ruth do the talking. "We just want what's best for him," they said, as if my love didn't qualify. As if years of scraped knees and midnight fevers didn't count. I remember standing outside the courtroom after the judge denied my petition, watching them file into their car like it was any other Tuesday. Aiden wouldn't even look at me. Ruth smiled as the door shut. That was the day I stopped asking for permission. I rented a one-bedroom above the florist shop on Main, started cleaning houses and tutoring after-school kids just to stay afloat. My hands, once calloused from rope and soil, became raw from bleach and chalk. But I kept going. I told myself there would be a way back, that Aiden would remember, that somewhere beneath all Ruth's noise there was still something of me rooted in that farm. I guess I still believed in roots then, even the ones no one else could see. The orchard was overgrown, wild with thistle and tangled bramble, like it had mourned Richard's passing by, giving up entirely. But when I stood at its edge, shovel in hand and boots sinking into the wet earth, I didn't see ruin. I saw memory. Aiden was 6 the year we planted the last row of Macintosh saplings. He had a gap-toothed smile and a habit of burying rocks under each tree for good luck. Daniel had pretended to care, but it was me and Aiden who named them: Big Red, Little Sweet, Jumpy, and Grandpa Apple, the one closest to the barn. That tree still stood, gnarled and bent, but alive, just like me. I started clearing that orchard the same week my custody appeal was denied. No fanfare, no camera crews. Just me and a pair of rusty clippers and an old wheelbarrow with one bad wheel. People talked, of course. They always do in towns like ours. "Cassie's lost it," I heard. "She's trespassing," someone else said, trying to claw her way back into the will. Let them talk. I wasn't there for Ruth. I wasn't even there for justice anymore. I was there because something needed saving, and for once, it was something I could touch with my hands. I trimmed limbs until my fingers bled, hauled broken branches and dead vines to the edge of the fence line. The soil still knew me. It gave just a little when I pressed my heel into it. I told myself that counted for something. A week in, one of the Thompson boys stopped by. 17, gangly, always in trouble. He leaned on his bike like he didn't care and said, "My uncle said you're crazy. That true?" I kept pruning. Probably. He watched a while longer. "You paying?" "No." More silence. Then, "Got any gloves?" I tossed him an extra pair from my bag, and just like that, he was raking beside me. Word must have spread. By the third week, I had 5 kids showing up after school. Some barely spoke. Some wouldn't stop talking. But they worked. They laughed. They asked questions about root rot and blossom blight like it mattered, like I mattered. And at night, when the world got quiet and my back ached in that sweet, satisfying way, I let myself dream. A garden. Not just for fruit, but for healing. For kids who needed somewhere to put their pain. Somewhere the soil didn't judge them. Somewhere like the orchard had been for me once, long ago. Aiden had loved it here. Before everything cracked open. Before Ruth started whispering that I was unstable, unreliable. Before Daniel started looking at me like I was some hard math problem he didn't want to solve. He planted that first apple seed with me, his little fingers pressing it into the dirt like it was treasure. And maybe it was. Maybe it still is. The first time I heard it, I was unloading mulch from the back of a borrowed pickup. The words drifted over the fence line like smoke from a brush fire. Thin, curling, and impossible to ignore. She's doing it for attention. I didn't turn. Just kept stacking bags, one after another, letting the weight fill the silence. It was always easier when I didn't react. That's how Ruth wanted me, either rattled or begging. I gave her neither. She's trying to make people feel sorry for her. Everyone knows she's only clearing the orchard because she's obsessed with getting back on the land. I recognized that voice, Mara Bailey. Ruth's mouthpiece with a fresh manicure and a gossip streak so sharp it could gut a deer. She wasn't talking to me, of course. No one ever does when they want the words to really land. They just speak loud enough to be overheard. "She can't let go," Mara continued. "I mean, the judge already ruled. It's just sad now." I tossed the last bag harder than necessary, dust billowing up like proof of the work I'd done. My hands were blistered, shoulders aching, heart steady. That afternoon, I caught Dina coming out of the post office. She's the kind of friend who never asks how you're doing unless she actually wants the answer. She took one look at me, sweat-streaked and dirt-caked, and tilted her head. "Heard the buzz," she said. "They're calling you Ruth's pity project." "Let them," I replied, brushing soil from my palms. "They need something to talk about." Dina narrowed her eyes. "You're sure this isn't going to break you?" I thought about it. About the hollow ache that settled in my chest every time I saw Aiden ride by on the school bus without looking up. About the way Daniel signed the custody paperwork like he was making a dinner reservation. About how I still caught myself waiting for Richard's voice whenever the wind rustled the trees just right. "I'm already broken," I said, smiling without humor. "Now I'm just building something new with the pieces." She nodded like she understood, but I knew better. No one really does unless they've watched their own child get pulled away one court order at a time. Unless they've stood in a kitchen that used to smell like cinnamon and now smells like absinthe. That night, someone spray-painted the orchard sign. The little wooden one I'd carved with "Future Garden," etched in rough, hopeful letters. They crossed it out and wrote, "Failure Farm," in red. I scrubbed it off the next morning. Took a picture first, though. A reminder. Proof that I was getting under their skin. Because the truth was, the orchard wasn't just growing new life. It was growing something far more dangerous in Ruth's world. It was growing hope. The courtroom smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner, the kind of sterile scent that tries to pretend justice isn't messy. I sat on the left, behind my lawyer, though lawyer is generous. Sandra was young, kind, and working my case pro bono because she'd once seen me deliver a calf in the middle of a thunderstorm. She believed in good karma. I believed in getting through the next hour without screaming. Across the aisle sat Ruth, in her pearls and pressed skirt, the portrait of composure. Daniel sat beside her like an afterthought, fiddling with a loose thread on his cuff. He wouldn't meet my eyes, he hadn't for months. Aiden sat between them. 17 days shy of 17 and already taller than both of us. He wore a dress shirt that didn't fit quite right and the closed-off expression Ruth had taught him to wear like armor. My son. My boy. Looking at me like I was the problem. The judge skimmed the file, glasses low on her nose, expression unreadable. Petitioner seeks modification of custody agreement based on renewed evidence of emotional availability and community support. Her voice was dry, bureaucratic. She could have been reading a grocery list. I tried not to grip the seat too hard. Tried not to think about all the mornings I'd packed Aiden's lunches with handwritten notes tucked between the sandwich and the apple. About the Halloween, I sewed his pirate costume by hand because he was afraid store-bought ones wouldn't make him look real. About the way he used to say, "Mommy, you smell like apples in bedtime." Sandra presented our case. Photos of the orchard restoration. Testimonials from the kids who came every week now to help. A short statement from Dina about my character. A notarized letter from Harold, even though he hadn't come yet. Not yet. Ruth's lawyer countered with a spreadsheet. Schedules. Stable homestead, he repeated like a prayer. School continuity. Emotional consistency. They showed one text. One single message I'd sent Aiden at midnight after a sleepless night. I miss you. Please don't forget who I am. The lawyer read it aloud like it was a threat. The judge looked at me. Finally. Looked at me like she was trying to find the woman underneath the file. "Do you have anything to say?" she asked. I nodded, stood, even though my knees wobbled. "I didn't come here today to fight for land or reputation or some abstract right," I said, voice rough. "I came because he's my son. Because I know what it means to be loved and to be erased, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even Ruth, and especially not Aiden." He didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared at the table like it had answers. The ruling was swift. Denied. Ruth's home was deemed more stable. The orchard, still technically in legal limbo. My petition, dismissed. Outside, the air hit me like a slap. Sandra touched my arm. "I'm sorry, Cassie. You said it beautifully. But it wasn't enough," I finished for her. Behind me, I heard Ruth's heels clicking down the courthouse steps. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence was smug enough. Aiden didn't look back. I drove home with the windows down, let the wind dry the tears I refused to wipe. The orchard waited for me like it always did. Quiet, steady, alive. I dropped to my knees beside Grandpa Apple, pressed my palm to the soil, and whispered, "I'm still here." And I was. Even if no one else saw me, I was still here. The first apple tree I ever planted died the same week Daniel left. Coincidence, maybe. But I always wondered if it had just given up, same as he did. Roots rot when they're left alone too long. And for years, I felt like mine were curling inward, shrinking, choking on silence and loss. But not anymore. By early October, the orchard was breathing again. Rows half cleared, trunks scraped clean, weeds pulled up like bad memories. The kids came after school, more of them now, their chatter filling the space like sunlight through broken branches. They didn't ask questions about court dates or custody filings. They didn't care about the whispered rumors passed around town like stale bread. They came because it felt safe. Real. And I clung to that. I saw it in Ella, who never looked you in the eye but knew how to prune a limb with perfect precision. In Toby, whose dad was inside for meth and whose mom didn't leave the couch anymore. In Zara, who wore 3 hoodies no matter the weather and only smiled when she was ankle-deep in compost. They worked, they healed, and I worked harder to stay just one step ahead of falling apart. Most days I brought a thermos of cider, poured into paper cups. We'd sit in a loose circle at the end of the day, boots muddy, fingers stained, talking about nothing and everything. That was where Harold first saw us. I didn't notice him at first. He stood by the edge of the field, half shadow, half statue, arms crossed over his faded army jacket. I assumed he was another one of Ruth's watchdogs come to report back that I was cultivating chaos again. I nearly waved him off. But then he nodded, slow and deliberate, before walking away without a word. It wasn't until the 3rd time he appeared, same stance, same silence, that I finally approached him. "Can I help you?" I asked, wiping my hands on my jeans. "You already are," he said, voice gravel thick. "Excuse me?" He looked at the kids, laughing now, one of them trying to juggle bruised apples and then back at me. "You remind me of Richard," he said, "more than any of his blood ever did." My breath caught. No one had said his name to me in months. I'm not trying to replace anyone," I said. "I know," Harold replied. "That's why it matters." Then he turned and walked off again, leaving me rooted to the spot, heart thudding like it used to when Richard would rest a calloused hand on my shoulder and say, "Good work, kid." I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the words, but because of the way they made something shift inside me. A tiny cracking, like the shell around my grief had finally split, letting something green push through. Something old. And new. The next morning, Harold came back. This time, he carried a thermos of his own. No cider. Just black coffee and an old tin of biscuits he didn't offer, but placed near the circle like an offering. He sat beside me in the dirt and said, "There's something you need to know." Harold didn't speak right away. He sat beside me like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he hadn't spent the last 10 years avoiding most of this town and everyone in it. He wore the same green jacket, frayed at the cuffs, and boots caked in years of things best left unspoken. He stared out across the orchard like he was looking for something that had already passed. "The old man didn't trust Ruth," he said finally, voice low and matter-of-fact. "Didn't trust her for a long time." I blinked. The sun was dipping behind the barn, casting gold light through the branches. Aiden used to call that hour the orchard's secret glow. I hadn't heard it in years. Harold didn't look at me. Just pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small, folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. "He asked me to keep this," he said, handing it over. "Said if things ever got bad, I'd know when to pass it along." I unfolded it carefully. Inside, a rough sketch. A tree labeled Grandpa Apple, and beneath it, a tiny X. My heart stuttered. That was our tree. Mine and Aiden's. The one with the crooked branch and the rock he buried when he was 6. "There's a lockbox," Harold continued. "Fireproof. Buried deep. He put it there the week before he went into hospice. Told me he was tired of watching Ruth twist the truth. Said you'd understand what to do with it." "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He finally looked at me then. Really looked. And there was no pity in his eyes. Just that same clear-eyed steadiness I'd seen in Richard. "Because he trusted you," Harold said. "Said you knew the land better than anyone. Said you had heart and Ruth had hunger. He wasn't about to let his legacy rot in her hands." I swallowed hard. The sketch trembled in my grip. "Come tomorrow," he added. "We'll dig together, just before sunrise." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He stood, dusted off his hands, and turned to go. But before he disappeared into the trees, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said, voice soft now like the crunch of dry leaves. "He used to say your name like it meant something. That orchard was never about apples. It was about roots. And you? You're still rooted here, Cassie, whether they like it or not." And then he was gone. The wind picked up. The orchard swayed. Somewhere behind me, the kids were still laughing, tossing pebbles and arguing about who could rake the fastest. But I stayed frozen, sketch in hand, heart racing with something I hadn't felt in months. Possibility. The soil was colder than I remembered. It bit through my gloves like ice teeth, numbing my fingers as I dug beside Harold in the half-light before dawn. He didn't say much, just grunted now and then, pausing to wipe his brow or glance up at the horizon as if expecting Richard himself to come walking out of the mist. The tree loomed above us. Grandpa Apple, older and more stubborn than anything else on the land. Its branches curled like gnarled fingers toward the sky, and at its base, the earth gave way with surprising ease. We hit metal just after the 3rd foot. Harold knelt beside the exposed corner and brushed the dirt away with the reverence of someone unearthing bones. "He said you'd know what to do with it," he murmured again, more to the box than to me. The lockbox was blackened, scuffed, but solid. I hauled it up with both hands, heart pounding like I'd just yanked it from a grave. "We didn't open it there." Harold just nodded toward the truck, and we drove back to my apartment in silence, the box strapped into the passenger seat like a child. It wasn't until we sat at my kitchen table, coffee untouched, breath held, that I turned the key. Inside, a thick envelope, a USB drive, and a folded piece of parchment that smelled faintly of cedar. Harold picked up the paper, his fingers shaking for the first time since I'd known him. "Land deed," he said. "Signed, notarized. Says he's transferring part of the orchard to you under stewardship." Not ownership, stewardship. That was Richard, always precise with words. My mouth went dry. "Is that legal?" He nodded slowly. "With the affidavit I'm signing today?" "Yes." I picked up the USB drive. Just a plain thing, no label, no markings. I plugged it into my laptop and opened the only file, a video. The timestamp read 5 days before Richard died. I clicked play. The screen lit up with Richard's face, drawn but clear-eyed, a plaid blanket over his lap and the old orchard behind him. He spoke slowly, but with the force of someone used to being heard. If you're watching this, he said, it means I didn't make it, and it means Ruth is probably telling folks what to think again. He smiled, thin and tired. Don't let her. I'm leaving this for Cassie because she's the one who's earned it. She took care of me when I couldn't take care of myself. She gave this land more love than anyone, including my own children. My vision blurred. Harold rested a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. I want this orchard turned into something better, Richard continued. Not another cash crop, not a war zone for family pride, a place for healing, for second chances. Cassie, if you're willing, start something, a program, for kids who need roots, like Aiden did, like you did. I've left the land, the papers, the rest, that's up to you. The video ended. The silence that followed was louder than Ruth's entire war. I closed the laptop, hands trembling. What now? I asked. Harold looked at me, eyes steady. Now, he said, we give the court something it can't ignore. And just like that, I remembered who I was. Not the woman they pitied, not the failure, not the one left behind. I was Cassie Caldwell. And I had a will in my hand. Dina didn't blink when I walked into her office carrying the box like it was a holy relic. She just raised an eyebrow, pushed aside her stack of small claims forms, and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. From Harold in the orchard to the video on the USB, to the deed written in Richard's unmistakable scrawl. I laid it all out on her desk papers, affidavits, the copy of the video we'd burned onto a fresh thumb drive. My hands didn't shake, not this time. I was done shaking. Dina watched the video twice. The first time with a lawyer's focus, scribbling notes in the margins of a legal pad, the second time with tears in her eyes. Jesus, she whispered when it ended. He really did this. He did, I said. Now help me make it count. She nodded, slow and deliberate. This is enough, especially with Harold's sworn statement. If we file today, we can get a hearing on the land deed within the month. And the custody? I asked, my voice catching. That's trickier, she said, flipping through the statute book she kept dog-eared on her desk. But if we attach the stewardship grant to a revised petition arguing that your contribution to the orchard shows long-term stability and investment in Aiden's well-being, she trailed off, already typing. I don't want to stoop to Ruth's level, I said. No smear campaigns, no backroom rumors. Dina looked up. Then don't, just play the video, let Richard tell the truth for you. By noon, we'd filed the documents. Dina submitted Harold's affidavit, the deed, and the video under a formal petition for property realignment and supplemental custody evaluation. It was official. I left the courthouse with a copy of the stamped petition in my bag and the sun on my face like it hadn't been there in months. As I passed the post office, I caught sight of Ruth across the street, stepping out of her SUV, clipboard in hand, probably on her way to another committee meeting or gossip ambush. She saw me. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just walked past her like she was a fence post. Let her wonder. The orchard was quiet when I got back. The kids had gone home, the tools stacked neatly by the shed. I stood beneath Grandpa Apple and closed my eyes, letting the breeze carry the scent of bark, earth, and something else. Something like purpose. I pressed my hand to the tree's trunk. We're not done yet, I whispered. That night, I sat by the window with the paperwork spread across the table, the soft rustle of the orchard just outside. I thought about Aiden. About the way he used to rest his head on my shoulder when he was too tired to walk back to the house. And I thought about the look on his face when he saw that video. Because he would see it. The whole town would. The Caldwell gossip mill spun into overdrive within 48 hours of the petition filing. At first, it was whispers. Did you hear Cassie's making a legal move? Some old will, maybe? Then came the calls. Dina fielded most of them with her signature blend of diplomacy and steel. But the louder the whispers got, the more Ruth started losing her grip on the narrative. That's when she stopped whispering and started roaring. By Friday, she marched into the town council meeting uninvited and waved a copy of the filing in front of anyone who'd look. It's fake, she snapped. Manipulation. She took advantage of an old man on his deathbed. When that didn't stick, she went public. I was at the orchard when it happened, hauling mulch to the north fence with Toby and Ella arguing over what music to play, when Zara came sprinting up the path, phone in hand. You need to see this. She turned the screen toward me. Ruth, front and center on the Caldwell Community Forum's Facebook Live feed. She's trespassing on private land. She's inciting children to work unsupervised in unsafe conditions. And this so-called video will? It's a fabrication. My father-in-law was not in his right mind near the end. Behind her, Daniel stood silent, arms crossed, not nodding, not speaking, just existing like a shadow. Aiden was nowhere in sight. I turned off the phone, took a slow breath, and looked at my kids because that's what they were now. Every scraped knee, apple picking, side-eyeing one of them. Get back to work, I said. Let her talk. They did. But inside, something shifted. Not fear, not doubt, clarity. This wasn't about land anymore, or even custody, it was about truth. So I called the church. The old meeting hall hadn't hosted a community hearing in years, not since the bridge collapse or the 4th of July fireworks funding fiasco. But it had good acoustics, plenty of folding chairs, and a pull-down projector screen that still worked if you jiggled the cable just right. Dina helped file the public notice. Harold offered to drive anyone who needed a ride. Ella's uncle rigged up the tech. I scheduled it for Sunday, because if Ruth wanted an audience, I was going to give her one. Only this time, I wasn't the one doing the talking. Richard would speak for himself. Sunday came with a storm brewing, not in the sky, but in the way the town buzzed. By noon, the parking lot outside the church was full. Trucks lined the gravel shoulder all the way down to the school. I sat in the front pew of the meeting hall, palms pressed flat against my thighs, pretending I couldn't feel the sweat collecting at the base of my spine. Ruth arrived 10 minutes before it started. She wore navy and pearls, like this was a fundraiser instead of a reckoning. Daniel followed her, eyes hollow. Aiden trailed behind, hands jammed in his hoodie pockets, headphones slung around his neck like armor. He didn't look at me. I didn't expect him to. Dina gave a short introduction. This is an informal community hearing regarding the land stewardship of the Caldwell orchard. At the request of the late Richard Caldwell, a video will was submitted alongside a sworn affidavit and deed transfer. With permission from the family. Here she glanced at Ruth, who nodded with a rigid chin. We will now view that recording. The lights dimmed, the screen flickered, and then Richard filled the room. He looked older than I remembered, but steady. Proud. His voice rang through the hall like gospel. He spoke of legacy, not inheritance, not control, but roots. He spoke of Aiden, of me, of how the orchard was never meant to be a weapon. When he said my name, I felt it ripple through the crowd. When he said he trusted me with the land, the kids, and the vision, I saw a few people actually blink like they'd just been hit. Then he said it, Ruth, I love you, but control isn't care. Cassie, she cares. Gasps. A cough in the back. A sharp intake of breath from Ruth. Aiden didn't move. The video ended. Silence stretched thick and hard across the room. Then Harold stood. No speech, no preamble, just a firm voice. I was there. I saw him sign it. And I stand by her. And that was all it took. Ruth shot to her feet. This is manipulation. He was confused, sick. No, Mom. Aiden's voice cut through the air like a knife. Every head turned. He stood now, shaking slightly, but his eyes locked on Ruth. You said she gave up on us, that she walked away, but he trusted her more than anyone. And you never told me that. She tried to speak. He didn't let her. I needed a reason to hate her, and you gave me one. But maybe it was yours. He turned toward me. And for the first time in a year, my son saw me, really saw me, and he didn't look away. The rain came later, after the crowd had cleared, after the folding chairs were stacked and the screen was rolled up with a quiet snap. But in that moment, just after Aiden spoke and the silence cracked open like a dropped plate, everything felt still. Ruth sat down hard, as if the air had been knocked out of her. Her hands trembled in her lap, fingers grasping for composure like it was something she could reclaim by sheer will. But the faces in the room had already shifted. The people she counted on, the bank manager's wife, the councilman who always played devil's advocate, were looking at her with something close to disappointment. Not rage, not scorn, just clarity. Aiden turned and walked out of the hall without another word. I didn't follow. Not right away. I sat there, hands clenched around the edge of the pew, waiting to feel something solid beneath me again. It took a while. Daniel approached me quietly, as if afraid I might shatter. I didn't know, he said, voice low, about the video, about any of it. I nodded once. You never asked. He winced. I should've, he admitted. Yes, I said. You should've. He opened his mouth, maybe to say more, but I stood before he could. I wasn't ready for that apology. Not yet. Outside, the rain had just begun to fall, soft and hesitant. I found Aiden sitting on the edge of the orchard fence, hood pulled up, feet dangling like he used to do when he was small and worried the world might be bigger than him. I stood beside him in the wet silence. "You knew," he said finally, "about the orchard, about all of this. You've been working here, all this time." I didn't want to stop, I replied, even when they told me to. Especially then. He didn't answer right away, just kicked his boot against the wood, letting water drip from the edge of his hood. "Why didn't you fight harder?" My breath caught. "I did, baby," I said, softer than I meant to. "You just couldn't see it." He nodded, eyes fixed on the trees. "Can I come help tomorrow?" he asked. "With the garden stuff?" It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something better. It was the first step back. The next morning, I found him there. Aiden leaning against the wheelbarrow like it was something he'd never abandoned. He didn't say much, just gave me a chin nod, slid on a pair of gloves, and started hauling brush without waiting for direction. And I let him. No big speeches, no teary reunions. We worked in silence, our movements syncing the way they used to when he was little, and followed my every step like a shadow. Around noon, the others showed up. Zara, Toby, Ella. They didn't ask why Aiden was there. Didn't question the sudden return of the boy who used to chase squirrels through the orchard and then vanished like mist one spring. They just handed him a rake and picked up where they'd left off. He smiled once, real and unguarded, when Toby cracked a joke about Harold's beat-up truck sounding like it coughed in Morse code. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to scare it off. Harold showed up just after lunch, carrying a box of old seed catalogs and a roll of graph paper. "We're gonna need a layout," he said, dropping everything on the makeshift table we'd built out of sawhorses and a slab of plywood. "Layout for what?" Aiden asked. Harold grinned, all teeth and wrinkles. "For your mom's garden co-op. That's what Richard wanted, right? An apprenticeship program. You kids ready to build something?" Aiden looked at me then, really looked, and nodded. "Yeah," he said. "We're ready." The rest of the day blurred into motion, rows measured out, names jotted in permanent marker on scrap cardboard signs, ideas flying faster than we could catch them. Bee gardens, compost zones, a section for herbs, maybe even chickens. When the sun dipped low and the sky turned sherbet orange, we sat on overturned buckets, eating apples and staring at what we'd started. "This?" Aiden said, voice quiet but sure. "Feels right." I didn't trust myself to speak. Just passed him the last apple and rested my hand on the dirt beside me. It was more than a return. It was a beginning. The court ruling came on a Tuesday, not with the bang Ruth had no doubt anticipated, but with a quiet envelope delivered to Dina's office and a single page stamped with the seal of Caldwell County. I was pruning back the last of the frost-burned leaves on the southern row when she called. "They ruled in your favor," she said, her voice caught somewhere between disbelief and triumph. "Partial land rights restored. The orchard is officially yours to steward, and they've reopened the custody case. 50-50, starting immediately." I sat down right there in the dirt, fingers still wrapped around the shears. My hands were shaking too much to use them anyway. 50%. It sounded like a fraction. It felt like a miracle. Aiden was already at the orchard when I returned, bag slung over one shoulder, earbuds tucked into his shirt collar. He was turning compost with Zara, sweat streaking his brow, and for a second I just watched him. This boy who had once been my whole world and had been pulled from me, inch, by people who called it love. I told him later, over peanut butter sandwiches and orange soda on the tailgate of Harold's truck. "We got it," I said, "the orchard. And time. We get time." His eyes didn't widen. He didn't gasp. He just nodded, slow and thoughtful. "Good," he said. "They don't get to decide everything. Not anymore." Word traveled fast. That night, Ruth called. I let it go to voicemail, then she showed up. She didn't knock. Just stood at the edge of the orchard, arms crossed over a pristine jacket, eyes scanning the rows like she might catch the land in some kind of mistake. I walked over slowly, boots sinking into soft earth, heart steady. "I suppose congratulations are in order," she said. Her voice was clipped, her smile a crack in porcelain. "You got what you wanted." I looked at the trees. At Aiden, laughing with Toby as they stacked crates for the rain barrels. At Harold, hunched over the garden plans with his spectacles halfway down his nose. "No," I said. "I got what was right." She didn't flinch. but something in her gaze wavered, just for a breath. This land was supposed to be Daniel's, she said, as if I hadn't already heard that 100 times. Aiden's. You weren't. Enough? I finished. Because I didn't share your name? Because I didn't play nice when you tried to erase me? She blinked, lips pressing together in a thin, tired line. I tried to protect this place, she said, but her voice had lost its bite. In my way. And I will in mine. She looked at Aiden then. Just a glance. Just long enough to see him turn and wave to me like he used to. With both hands. No hesitation. Ruth sighed. A sound like deflating pride. You can keep your orchard, she said. I nodded. I'll keep my son too. Therapy wasn't a miracle. It didn't come with trumpets or revelations. It came with cheap couches, lukewarm tea, and a woman named Carla who had a voice like wind through pine trees and a way of waiting through your silence until you filled it yourself. Aiden didn't speak much that first session. He slouched low in the chair, arms crossed, eyes flicking toward the clock like it might save him. I didn't push. I just sat beside him, hands folded in my lap, and let the silence stretch. Carla started small. Tell me about the orchard, she asked, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And slowly, week after week, the pieces started to emerge. I liked it better when it was just us, Aiden admitted on session 3, eyes still on his sneakers. Before Grandma made it all heavy. By week 5, he talked about the night he stopped answering my texts, about Ruth standing in the doorway telling him I was unstable, distracted, dangerous even, about how he believed her because she made it so easy to believe. She said you only wanted me to get back at Dad, he whispered. I didn't want to be a weapon. I nodded. You never were, I said. Not even once. Daniel joined us for one session. He sat stiffly, fingers curled around a styrofoam cup, apology hanging in the air like wet laundry. I thought keeping the peace was the same as doing the right thing, he said. But it wasn't peace. It was silence. I didn't say I forgave him, not then. But I didn't walk out either. The orchard became our sanctuary. Not just mine anymore. Ours. Aiden came every day after school. Sometimes he worked, sometimes he just lay in the grass, earbuds in, letting the sun hit his face like he was trying to remember how it felt to be soft again. One afternoon, he stayed late. We were planting kale. His idea. And I watched him press the seedlings into the soil like he was placing something sacred. I'm sorry I believed her, he said, not looking up. It wasn't fair. I didn't know how to, not. My throat burned. It's okay, I said, kneeling beside him. You know now. That's enough. He looked at me then, really looked, and smiled in that crooked way that used to knock the wind out of me when he was 5 and just learning what it meant to feel proud. You're kinda badass, he said. I laughed, pulling off my gloves. Took you long enough to notice? We planted the rest of the bed in silence, side by side, not perfect, not healed, but healing. And that was enough. It started with a single row raised beds framed with salvaged wood, filled with compost and topsoil that smelled like life. We planted lettuce first, then carrots, radishes, snap peas. By the 3rd week of spring, the kids had built a rainwater catchment system out of donated barrels and old gutter pipe. Toby named it the Flowmaster, and no one argued. The Caldwell Youth Garden Co-op had a sign now. Painted by Ella and Zara, bold green letters stretching across an old barn door, Richard's Roots. Below it, in smaller script, a place to grow. Word spread quickly. The local high school sent an environmental science class out to volunteer on Thursdays. The middle school offered extra credit for kids who signed up to compost or water. Even the town librarian showed up one morning with a flat of marigolds and an apron that read, Plant Lady in Chief. I watched it unfold like a time-lapse, rows multiplying, laughter echoing, tools passed from hand to hand with purpose. Aiden thrived in the middle of it, never quite the loudest, but always the one who noticed when a plant needed staking or a kid needed space. He didn't call it leadership, but that's exactly what it was. Harold built a small tool shed with help from the Thompson brothers. Someone donated picnic tables. Dina secured a microgrant to help fund supplies. The orchard didn't just grow food, it grew community. Kids who used to fight in hallways now argued over watering schedules. Teens who barely spoke raised their hands to lead planting demos for visiting elementary classes. And me? I finally exhaled. Every morning, I walked the rows with my notebook, tracking sprouts, making lists, humming without realizing it. I taught compost ratios, companion planting, how to thin seedlings without pulling up the whole row. But mostly, I listened. To stories, to dreams, to kids who needed someone to believe in more than just their trouble. One afternoon, I caught Aiden showing two freshmen how to properly deadhead a flower. He used the same words I once did. Same tone. Gentle, but clear. You want them to grow again, you've got to take away what's already done. I stood back, hidden behind the shade of a blossoming tree, and felt tears sting my eyes. This place had become more than a garden. It was a living promise, one made in Richard's final breath, one that had weathered courtrooms, gossip, and grief, and one that was now taking root in every kid who showed up with dirt under their nails and hope in their pocket. We were growing more than vegetables. We were growing second chances. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had one too. Ruth came on a Sunday. She didn't call ahead, didn't text, just pulled up in her silver SUV like it was any other day, not the first time she'd stepped foot on the orchard since she tried to bury me with it. I saw her from the edge of the herb row, standing stiff by the gate, arms folded, hair too perfect for someone who claimed to respect the land. For a moment, no one noticed her. Kids kept weeding, laughing, music playing low from someone's phone. Aiden was over by the compost pile, teaching a new girl how to layer brown and green waste. Then she saw me. And the spell broke. I walked up slowly, wiping my hands on my jeans. The air smelled like rosemary and damp soil. A soft breeze tugged at the edge of my shirt. I stopped 2 feet from her, close enough to see the fine cracks in her foundation, to smell the ghost of her perfume. She looked around, taking it all in. The rows of vegetables, the chicken coop in the corner, the laughter of kids she'd once called a liability. Her mouth tightened. "It's different," she said. "Yeah," I answered. "It's supposed to be." She hesitated. For the first time, Ruth Caldwell, the woman who'd fought me in courtrooms and poisoned me with smiles, looked almost unsure. "I came to see Aiden," she said finally. I nodded once. "He's here, working, like he does most days." She glanced down at her shoes, then up again. "He doesn't answer my texts. He will, when he's ready." Ruth blinked. Once, slowly, like it stung. "I thought I was protecting him," she said. I folded my arms, letting the silence press in. "You were protecting control." Another pause. The kind that swallows everything else. "He was my grandson before he was your son," she said, voice quiet now, almost breaking. "No," I said evenly, "he's always been both. You just didn't want to share him." Her eyes shone, not with tears, not quite, but with the weight of something cracked open too late. She looked over my shoulder at the orchard in bloom, at the kids who had taken back a place she'd tried to own. "You made this," she said. "I rebuilt it," I corrected, "from what your pride left behind." She nodded. "Once. Twice." "I'm sorry," she said. "It wasn't warm, it wasn't easy. But it was honest. I didn't offer forgiveness, just a boundary." "You can keep your pride, Ruth," I said. "I'll keep my son." She looked away then, out across the rows of lettuce and chard and possibility. Then she turned and walked back to her car. The orchard didn't notice her leave, and neither did I. A year later, the orchard sang. Not with words, not with music, but with the rustle of leaves, the thrum of bees, the laughter of children winding between rows of corn and cosmos. The soil, once brittle and bruised, was soft again, forgiving, whole, like it had absorbed all our hurt and grown something better from it. Cassie's Garden Co-op was now a name etched into the town's rhythm. Schools partnered with us for field trips. Retired veterans volunteered twice a week. Local chefs started requesting our produce by name. And on the gate, right where the old splintered sign once hung, stood a new one, carved from cedar, varnished by Aiden's careful hands. "Richard's Roots, a farm for the future." We hung it together. He held the drill. I studied the wood. Neither of us said much, but when it was done, he smiled that quiet, crooked smile of his and said he would have loved this. "I think he already does," I said. The orchard had become more than a legacy. It was a refuge, a haven, a heartbeat for the forgotten and the found. Toby led weekend composting classes now. Ella had started journaling daily growth updates, her handwriting neater with every entry. Zara taught the littles how to pinch basil without killing the roots. And Aiden, my Aiden, wasn't just helping, he was becoming. He spoke at the town meeting last month, nervous, fidgeting, but steady. "This land gave me back my mom," he said. "It gave me back myself." There wasn't a dry eye in the hall. Ruth never returned. She sent a letter once, typed, distant, explaining she was moving to Asheville to be near Daniel. She didn't ask for contact, she didn't mention Aiden. I never responded. Some goodbyes don't need closure, they just need distance. Daniel, on the other hand, came around. Showed up with a set of gardening gloves one Saturday morning, eyes soft with regret, voice unsure. "I'd like to help," he said. I let him rake leaves in silence. He came back the next week. That was enough. Now, on warm afternoons, we host community potlucks under the orchard's shade. Long tables groaning with harvests, stories, forgiveness passed hand to hand. I watch Aiden play guitar under the big apple tree, kids draped across blankets listening like every chord is sacred. Sometimes, I close my eyes and remember the way it used to be, before the fire, before the fracture. And then I open them again and see what grew in its place. Aiden hands me a crate of tomatoes, his palms stained red, his grin bright. "We're going to need more beds," he says. I smile, wiping sweat from my brow. "Then we'd better keep planting." The sun sinks low, casting gold over everything. Laughter echoes, roots deepen. And for the first time in forever, peace doesn't feel like something I'm chasing. It feels like something I've grown.